Most people imagine narcissism as a single monstrous trait. Either someone is a narcissist or they're not. That view is comforting but wrong. Narcissism is less like a label and more like a ladder, each rung representing a deeper psychological strategy to survive, dominate, or belong. At its root, it's not about vanity. It's about wounds, unmet needs, and a fragmented self trying to secure significance through others. You've met the softer versions already. The person who needs constant reassurance, the friend who can't tolerate being out of the spotlight. But those are only the surface symptoms of a far deeper structure. As narcissism evolves, it refines its tools. The early stages are clumsy bids for attention. The later stages become quiet, deliberate forms of manipulation. Each level represents a shift away from authentic selfhood and a tightening grip on external validation as a source of power. Understanding these 7 levels doesn't just explain difficult people, it reveals how fragile identities transform into predatory personas. The first levels may feel familiar. The final ones can devastate lives if left unchecked. You know the type before you can even name it. The person whose sense of self rises and falls with every nod, compliment, or social media like. They are not malicious. They're not plotting to take from you. What you're seeing is a fragile ego desperately trying to stabilize itself by clinging to outside signals. This is the most misunderstood stage of narcissism because it looks like low self-esteem. In reality, it's still self-absorption, just not predatory yet. Their world is a hall of mirrors. They don't know who they are without reflections from others. Think of Neville Longbottom in the early Harry Potter books. He isn't cruel or calculating, but his whole identity bends under the weight of how people view him. In this stage, their compliance is not kindness, it's survival. They don't yet manipulate, but they orbit. You offer praise, they orbit closer. You withhold it, they collapse inward. This is the insecure approval seeker's trap, dependence masquerading as connection. Their energy drains because they're constantly scanning the emotional weather, trying to be what is wanted. So over time, this craving for reassurance builds the foundation for more complex narcissistic defenses. Once you understand that fragility can harden into entitlement, you can predict the second stage, the mirroring performer who learns to dazzle rather than plead, and who begins to shape others rather than simply follow them. This is the level where narcissism stops begging and starts performing. The insecure approval seeker of level 1 has discovered something more sustainable than neediness, the power of image. At this stage, the person learns that admiration can be manufactured, not through authenticity but through design. They begin to construct a version of themselves that looks intelligent, moral, successful, or enlightened, not because they are, but because they've realized people reward the performance of virtue more than its reality. The self becomes a curated exhibit, not a lived experience. Their identity hinges on how convincingly they can project the ideal self, the one that earns applause, envy, or imitation. But beneath this polished exterior lies an uncomfortable truth. Their sense of worth is still externally anchored. They haven't outgrown dependency. They've just disguised it. You'll notice them in how they obsess over perception. They over-articulate their intentions, overcompensate their flaws, and overly dramatize their growth. They don't lie maliciously. They exaggerate strategically. Status symbols, perfect relationships, intellectual superiority, or moral purity become shields. Criticism isn't processed, it's deflected, because it threatens the image they've worked so hard to protect. Unlike overt manipulators, they rarely coerce. They charm, posture, or guilt you into approval. Think of someone like Jordan Belfort before his fall. Slick, self-assured, magnetic, but largely powered by optics, not substance. Their power is fragile, their pride is inflated, and their greatest fear is being seen without their armor. What happens when charm stops working? That's when the narcissist learns to escalate into the next level where validation is not just desired, it's extracted. At this stage, the narcissist stops chasing admiration and starts engineering it through the weather systems of emotion. Here, power isn't built on image, but on emotional leverage. The emotional hooker thrives not by being adored, but by being needed. Their skill is subtle. They create dependency by destabilizing your emotional footing. One moment, they flood you with warmth and validation. The next, they retreat into silence or vague disappointment. You feel like you've done something wrong, but they never say what. That ambiguity? It's by design. It keeps you trying harder. They don't control you with commands. They control you with tension. You'll hear phrases like, "After all I've done for, now you could wonder or I guess you." Don't care as much as I do. These aren't reflections of vulnerability. They're emotional landmines. This level weaponizes guilt, martyrdom, and selective vulnerability. They cry not just to release emotion, but to reroute yours. They don't ask directly for power. They bend your empathy until it becomes obedience. Their favorite tools are the silent treatment, guilt trips, and sudden withdrawal of affection. Over time, you don't think freely. You scan their mood first. A well-known fictional example of this level is Amy Dunn from Gone Girl. Her genius wasn't in physical strength or intellect. It was in her ability to twist the emotional perception until she became both the victim and the puppeteer. But emotional strings snap eventually, and when they do, the narcissist must evolve again. If emotions stop controlling others, they move toward ideology, morality, and superiority. That's when the game becomes righteous. Here, the narcissist shifts from emotional control to dominance through comparison. They no longer rely on guilt or affection. Instead, they measure worth by superiority. The competitive validator doesn't connect, they rank. Every interaction becomes a scoreboard. If you share an achievement, they have one better. If you speak confidently, they interrupt to reassert hierarchy. Their value system is vertical. Someone must be above, someone must be below. You rarely feel celebrated around them. You feel sized up. In conversations, they insert subtle jabs, backhanded compliments, or shift focus back to their triumphs. It's not always malicious, it's reflexive. They can't tolerate being one of many. They need to be the one. They may appear generous, but only if the spotlight lands back on them. If they help you, they expect applause. A perfect example of this level is Miranda Priestley from The Devil Wears Prada. Her success is undeniable, but she doesn't just lead. She dominates through subtle dismissal, cold evaluations, and impossible standards. Every interaction is a chess move to assert her rank. Beneath the designer wardrobe and intellectual dominance is a deep fragility, the terror of being irrelevant. At this level, the narcissist measures worth not by depth or impact, but by how loudly others clap. The tragedy is this: they could build kingdoms with others, but they'd rather win alone. At this stage, narcissism sheds the charm and subtlety of earlier levels. It no longer craves validation, it demands submission. The entitled control freak believes the world revolves around them, and if it doesn't, they'll bend it. They don't ask for loyalty, they expect it. Their sense of self is swollen with imagined superiority. You'll often find them angry not because you wronged them, but because you didn't serve them. Rules don't apply to them, only to you. They speak in ultimatums, not dialogue. When they care, it's strategic. When they listen, it's to find leverage. Empathy is feigned, not felt. Every interaction becomes a silent negotiation where they must come out on top. If they give, it's a power move. If they take, it's their right. Relationships are no longer emotional. They are structured like empires, with them as the self-appointed ruler. The clearest fictional embodiment of this level is Tywin Lannister from Game of Thrones. Tywin didn't need to scream to control. His presence alone dictated terms. He viewed his children as assets, loyalty as obligation, and emotion as weakness. To him, power was not something shared. It was enforced, and anyone who challenged that order was swiftly corrected or discarded. This level of narcissism isn't loud in the way a tantrum is. It's composed, calculated, and deeply convinced of its own divine right to rule. But the more control they seek, the more fear they breed, and fear is a brittle form of loyalty. What happens when people stop fearing them? That unraveling takes us to something even more sinister, where charm disappears and cruelty becomes the core operating system. This level of narcissism doesn't dominate through force. It disarms you with beauty, attention, and illusion. The seductive manipulator doesn't need to argue their worth. They enchant it into your psyche. They study your insecurities, mirror your desires, and shapeshift into your ideal partner, friend, or leader. But beneath that tailored perfection is a weaponized awareness. They seduce to conquer, not connect. You won't even know you've been pulled into their game until your sense of reality begins to warp. They mix truth with fiction, affection with neglect, clarity with confusion, just enough to keep you addicted to their approval. The high they offer is strategic. The withdrawal is deliberate. Unlike earlier levels, this narcissist doesn't seek validation, they farm it. You become the host, and they the parasite cloaked in perfume. A textbook fictional example is Tom Ripley from The Talented Mr. Ripley. Brilliant, poised, and emotionally fluent, Ripley weaponized charm like a surgeon uses a scalpel. He created entire false identities, orchestrated sympathy, and psychologically dismantled others while wearing the mask of innocence. This is the mark of a level 6 narcissist. They leave you doubting your memory, your instincts, and sometimes even your sanity, while still making you crave their presence. Their power lies not in brute force, but in the ability to slip inside your emotional operating system unnoticed. It's no longer about superiority or approval. It's about domination through emotional seduction. This is the final and most dangerous tier of narcissism, not because it's loud, but because it's silent in its cruelty. The predatory narcissist doesn't just want to be admired or obeyed, they want full-spectrum control. You're not a person in their world, you're a position, a resource, a slot in the system they're engineering. At this level, the narcissist has detached so fully from conscience that human connection is merely a tactic. Empathy is a weakness they mimic, not experience. Morality is a leash they cut, or worse, use against you. Their charm doesn't aim to seduce. It exists to disarm. Their silence isn't peace, it's the loading of a psychological weapon. And when they strike, they do so without rage. That's cold, surgical, justified in their mind. You'll notice something eerie about these individuals. They often appear calm under pressure, unaffected by emotional chaos, and disturbingly rational during acts of destruction. Their strength is rooted in disassociation. They can destroy a relationship, a reputation, a life, and still sleep peacefully, convinced it was necessary. The game they play isn't interpersonal, it's existential. They don't seek revenge for pain, they seek dominance, because your suffering is confirmation of their supremacy. They play the long game, manufacturing trust over months or years, just to pull a string at the exact moment it hurts the most. This is no longer narcissism for approval, it's narcissism as warfare. A chilling embodiment of this level is Hans Lander from Inglourious Bastards. Polite, articulate, even charming, yet utterly indifferent to human suffering. He manipulated with finesse, laughed in the face of horror, and treated betrayal as a business transaction. Lander didn't seek admiration. He didn't care if you hated or loved him. He only cared that you bent to his calculation. His power lay in his ability to see every person as a pawn, every smile as leverage. This is what level 7 looks like when narcissism evolves into cold, tactical domination. What separates them from other narcissists isn't just a lack of empathy, it's the complete absence of internal resistance. You might hesitate before crossing a moral line. They don't. You might question whether someone deserves punishment. They already wrote your ending. And when someone like this enters your life, the warning signs won't be dramatic. They'll be invisible until it's too late. So ask yourself this: would you recognize a predator dressed as a savior before you offered them your trust? People think spotting a narcissist is about watching for arrogance, but the truth is far more subtle and far more dangerous. The deeper levels of narcissism don't scream, they whisper. They imitate care, mimic connection, and feed off your unhealed wounds. Understanding these levels isn't about labeling others, it's about arming yourself with awareness. Because every level you can identify is one less trap you fall into. And the moment you stop reacting to manipulation and start recognizing the architecture behind it, you no longer play the game, they do.